evening and welcome to The World Today, being brought to you from the Bolivar Hall in central London. Today we're going to discuss the situation, past, present, future, of one of the most important areas globally, the Korean Peninsula, which is still suffering from the ravages and impact culturally and politically, certainly, of the Cold War that dominated most of the 20th century. With me is Professor Heonik Kwon, teaches anthropology at Cambridge University, author of a book on North Korea, called North Korea Beyond Charismatic Politics, which discusses the cultural political evolution in that country. Heonik, welcome. Very good to have you with us. Before we move on to other things, tell me a bit about yourself. You were born in South Korea.
Yes, I was born in Seoul, but I spent my childhood and teenage next to one of the largest American military bases in South Korea.
Which one?
It's Camp Henry in Daegu. It's the third largest city. The city that was not taken by North Korea during the Korean War, together with further down Busan. And so Busan and Daegu had a very substantial military presence by the US Army. So I was growing up there, but I never saw anything inside the camp because it was inaccessible.
But did you run into US soldiers?
Yes, every day.
All the time?
Yeah, and Korean ladies who have relationship with them.
With them?
Yeah.
And
a lot of Yankee things like spams and chocolates, which were inaccessible to us, but I saw them on an everyday basis being sold in the market.
And baseball being played?
Yes, it was very popular because it's unlike in Pakistan and other parts of South Asia, we were quite influenced by baseball, the American sports culture, as well as early on Japan's sports culture, which was influenced by America's sports culture. So double bind. So baseball was a serious thing.
Unity. Do you think it's feasible that there can be a sort of medium-term unification project for Korea?
I think the opinions vary, but I don't see any other way. Unity doesn't mean the one state, one nation solution. It's going to be 20th century stuff, you know. And we can live in different sort of provinces or with political kind of entities, but open to each other. You know, it's not ideal, but it can be better than what we think of as an ideal.
A confederal solution.
Confederal solutions, or sort of different states having different policies, but on the basis of non-aggression and, complete and conscientious agreement on the imperative of peace, right? And start reducing the armed forces. And I don't see how Korea will become neutral states, neither north and south. But I think together, if they start talking to each other, I think they will find, they can find solutions, both in the history of international law, international politics, or European examples, etc. Or maybe we become less nation state than before, a member of communities, and through which South and North talk to each other, not between the two only, but within a larger community of societies. I don't know. I think there are many ways to pursue this, but not unity, but reconciliations, and reconciliation has to be done between the two states. Otherwise, you don't know how the United States is going to change its course in 21st century. The world is very versatile, We don't know how China will change its course.
But China is huge.
Yeah, China will change its course. And in my personal view, that there is no other way than working on the question of unity, but unity in a very considerate and modern.
Not on the German model.
Not on the German model.
Which one side crushed.
No. I don't think it's going to happen in Korea. And North Korea made it very clear. And then the difference between Europe, Germany and Korea is Korea had a war, civil war. Germany didn't. And Germany has been part of this European consolidation. But the geopolitics in Asia, the international relations, particularly in relations between United States and Asian states, is purely bilateral. And so there is no community as such. And also, we shouldn't forget the fact that between Eastern Europe and Asia, the history of socialism, history of revolution has very different meaning.
Yes.
There is kind of desire for self-determination.
Yes.
And I mean, if we go back to the earlier 1920s, why people became radical? Because for the honorable cause of self-determination.
They wanted the Japanese out.
Yeah, I mean, to be equal to everybody else, to earn self-respect, which I have no problem with. And then I think because in a way, historically generated the wave of nationalism, with a very legitimate wave of nationalism, we shouldn't forget, we shouldn't chuck it away. I mean, because that's our legacy.
But I mean, also the problems aren't totally solved, because both in South Korea and in Japan, the United States has large military bases.
Sure, yeah.
And, there are many people from both countries who feel that as long as these military bases exist, they can't be truly independent.
Yes, I think it's in the right context, with the right group of statesmen, and I think this has to end. But when and how is another question, and Japan is not helping at the moment at all. No, but in that sense, China is not helping at all. It doesn't make sense at the era of 20th century in which kind of informal imperium was created with all this kind of spiderweb military bases. It has to be over. We have other things to worry about, global warming and all. And I don't want my good childhood hometown continue to be divided across the world between the military camp and the rest. And there is no connection between the two, and the two groups don't engage at all. The American military camps everywhere is kind of self-imposed colony, in which these colonies don't make any social ties with outside wider societies.
Do you think there's any serious possibility of war between North and South?
No, I don't think so. I think I don't know what's happening in American politics. It's disturbing and it's very worrying, but there is no possibility, and there shouldn't be any possibility. A war in that part of the world with heavy industrialized armed forces, it's a regional issue, it's a really truly global issue. And I think thinking people in North Korea.
And I think even within the United States, the military political establishment is very divided.
Yes.
There's no unanimity on that.
No. But it's sometimes very confusing. Yeah. But that's what North Korean, at least the elite at the regime level, have problem with the United States. Because, North Korea is a very stable country. It has been stable from 1953 onwards, and particularly in terms of succession of power and the continuous war systems and, this in auto politics. They haven't changed. Whereas United States, because it's a democratic system and it changes its kind of
President.
President, and it's very executive power-oriented system. So it's very confusing, and one year it says this, and the following year it says the other things, and you prepare certain kind of belligerent kind of rhetoric based on the previous administration, and you don't know how this one works with the new administration. And so I'm sure I don't want to be in North Korean kind of strategic group, which must be tearing their head at the moment.
Let's discuss the situation in 1945. The Second World War has ended. Japan has suffered a huge defeat, and a horrific defeat in the sense that nuclear weapons were experimented on the Japanese people. And also, I mean, we know what the Japanese colonialism was and how brutal it could be. But nonetheless, the campaign against the Japanese waged by the West, particularly the United States, was replete with horrific images, Orientalist images, painting out the Japanese to be specially savage.
So, you are the enemy. Oh, I am not supposed to laugh. You've heard that the Japanese do not show their feelings, nor do I have big teeth and thick glasses. How sad to disillusion you, and how easy. Easy because you do not know the Japanese. You only think you do. It is a fact that the strong remain strong only if they exercise their strength. So, we exercise our strength. It is a fact that the lower the birth rate among the weak, the less potential danger for us in the future. So, we control the birth rate.
Much more than the Germans, because they came from a different culture, etc., etc. All that happened. But Korea was, of course, had been occupied by the Japanese for many, many decades. And so your intelligentsia, both nationalist and communist and socialist and radicals, were formed in the crucible of struggling on some level against the Japanese occupation.
Indeed, yeah. I think the crucial era was 1920s. I mean, in a very micro level, my father's family, my grandfather was local gentry and who didn't have much land, but who was really interested in education for the future.
Mandarin.
So, yes. So he sent several nephews and close family members to Japan to study, to encounter modern education. And many of them turned to radicalism because that's, you know, when you try to learn and try to make sense of the world, you try to find a solution. And at that time, Russian Revolution took place, and the only power that be in favor of decolonization was in the North, and it was natural for them to be radical. And then also women's questions and class questions and social reform and social revolutions, equality and freedom equality went along together. But like many families, they held on to a few just for safety. So my father got into banking, you know, as a clerk, banking industry. So in a way, like many families in that region, so radicals and kind of non-radicals had both existed in the family. I think in that sense, in a way, the situation in the 1920s with Russian Revolution took place, and Wilsonian self-determination rhetoric was in the air. So like in Vietnam, the same time, Korea, the Vietnamese intellectual history, political intellectual history in 1920s and Korea's 1920s
is quite
many similarities in other parts of Asia as well. So I think in a way, the indigenous milieu, the bipolarization of politics, or the two ways to look out for the path to self-determination already took roots. So I don't know how to call them. Was that these two groups, more radical on the one hand, the other more moderate nationalists or radical nationalists, if you might call them, were connected in friendship, they're within the same families, and so. But clearly, I think intellectual movements at the time started taking on two bifurcated roles, and later on, I think the radical nationalism, both in radical nationalism, moderate nationalism, well, if let's say Wilsonian way or Russian way, left and right, if you
Yes.
like, and then but both in left and right, it start another division, bifurcation for gradual reform and militant struggle, revolution, and so Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea, is far from alone. I mean, so many intellectuals at the time and thinking people.
And Pyongyang was the center of the intelligentsia?
No, I wouldn't say that.
No.
Pyongyang was center of some really serious discussion about modernity because Pyongyang tradition was very strong in Protestantism. So there were many Protestant elite intellectuals. It's the irony of history. North Korea was very strong in Christianity, whereas the southern part was less so. But after the Korean War, South became
the
very Christian, within Asia at least, and the North no longer.
Heonik, which year were you born in?
62.
So you
Cuban
were
crisis.
born 9 years after the war began, after the war ended.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Yeah.
So as you were growing up in the southern part of the divided peninsula, what was your take when you first, let me pose it differently, when did you first think about the war and what had happened? At school, university?
I think at school, because by the time I was in school, Korea was in the middle of the Vietnam War. So the anti-communism was, the culture of anti-communism was really strong. We were in the thick of it. So believe it or not, I earned the national prize with the best anti-communist slogan when I was, primary school, very young. But it was canceled later on because some people figured out that something is not right with the slogan. But the slogan is, a very honest slogan is something like, there is no end in the struggle against communism, and there is no rest in the struggle to eliminate communism. And some clever ones thought that if there is no end in the struggle against communism, that means communism is perpetual. So this is totally wrong. And so the prize was canceled. I was seriously reprimanded by the schoolmaster, beaten up and everything. So maybe that awakened certain interest in it.
And did your parents or your father fight in the Korean War?
No. My mother had a kind of really difficult time. She walked from Seoul to her home village, about 200 kilometers on foot. But what is really interesting is it's quite common knowledge in the generation. It's only in recent years. The reason I'm interested in Korean War history, after having spent years in Vietnam, is that finally she talks to me because she knows that I'm interested. And I don't know why I never asked
Talked to her before?
Yeah, and I think I was interested, but I never really, tried to relate to her as a historical person, if you like. And so, as is very well known in that generation, my mother, high school student with friends, they followed the North Korean army all the way down to south because that was the only safe route. Because if you follow the refugees, they were bombarded and they were totally exposed to aerial assault by the
by the Americans and South Koreans,
by the U.S. Air Force,
yeah,
because which had great difficulty distinguishing between the friends and enemies, and because they all look the same. But it's not a justification. Tragedy of the Korean War has a lot to do with this kind of this myth and phantom of non-differentiation between the civilians and combatants and friends and enemies. And so she followed the North Korean forces along rugged mountains, and then through which she arrived in her home village. But of course, there was a very generalized experience among the war refugees at the time, but which we never heard of in our textbooks and in the voluminous.
That's astonishing. I've never heard that before.
Yes. Now everything makes sense because, when you do people's war, the first thing you have to do is to teach them and discipline them that you are the sons and daughters of the people, no matter how anachronistic the reason for the war is, but in conduct of war. So the North Koreans, the regular North Korean army, or the partisan southern partisan army is different thing. But regular North Korean army, they don't steal your food. They don't violate your body. So they don't forcibly recruit you to their ranks. So there's 3 questions, and so the many refugees, especially youth, followed them. And then also they had to travel only through the night and along the forest, along the mountain ridges, because they had no control of the airspace. The airspace in the Korean War was totally under the control of the
Like in
United States.
Vietnam?
Like in Vietnam, yes. So they invented all sorts of
ways of avoiding it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So that was, she still talks about it. But for her, it's good because I see her as a historical person and as a person as such, rather than a mother of someone and an independent person. And she feels that, I think. And then she recognized that there is a merit in being considered seriously by your children as a historical person. So, which is a good thing. So I think to reflect on war experience, no matter how difficult it may be, does good to our relations, and especially in that context. So, which I appreciate.
Heonik, we are many years, many decades now since the official Cold War between communism and capitalism came to an end. Of course, it was never cold in Asia.
No.
We had a hot war in Korea.
Right.
We had a hot war in Vietnam. We had the failing British Empire fighting a very vicious war in Malaysia.
It was very vicious.
Very vicious. So it was never cold in Asia, though it was cold in Europe for the most part. So in a way, it's a misnomer. But anyway, since the Korean War ended in 1953, when I was in North Korea, they showed me the place where the peace treaty was signed in Panmunjom and all that. So I imbibed quite a lot of all that. But there have been tensions all along. The other point which I think is there is that though the heavy bombing and destruction of North Korea, not a single dwelling left, produced a very hard and semi-brutal leadership as a result of it. But in South Korea too, which people in the West don't talk about because they're basically not well informed about it, Also, we had savage dictatorships.
Right.
Syngman Rhee is only one name. There were many others that followed. So the tragedy of the peninsula is that the experiences, different, were yet on some levels not so different.
Oh, God, Jesus. So much similarities between the two. I mean, the two societies diverged later on, but in post-war years, I think the war system just continued. So you mobilize the society. It's people's war on both sides, right? And so it's civil war, but it's the war of decolonization in a way. There are still things to be settled with. So these two political groups wage wars with huge international intervention, but you mobilize the population in labor, materials, resources, even the spirit, soul, in a maximal mobilizations, and you create this war system, and it doesn't go away easily. But the key thing is, because Korea as a whole experienced a war system under the Japanese occupation during the last years of Japan's colonial occupation, when Japan waged war against China first and then everyone else, in that region. So the Koreans lived through this war system for at least something like a decade before 1945. And without having a chance to liberalize or correct the course from 1945 to the immediate post-liberation eras, they once again had a chance to magnify the war system, totalizing war system. And so that war system continues in North Korea in great deal, in many ways, in societal and all sorts of level. South Korea, I think it lasted until the 1980s, and with the eruption of democratic voices,
Changed something.
it changed.
The American military bases are still there.
Oh, still there. Still there. But it's American military bases, but the meaning of American presence has become a very controversial issue.
In South Korea.
In South Korea. Not everyone agrees on how to interpret the American presence in South Korea, and which is a good thing. People debate. and because it's a threat from the North, a rhetorical threat, and
yes.
It's continuous, it's natural that people feel frightened. And then old memories of Korea will come back. And during the Korean War, the South was a very weak state and ill-prepared society for war. Although the war system up to 1945, as I said, people are familiar with, but compared to North Korea, the continuity of that war system to 1950 was much weaker in South. So southern state was weaker compared to North in this mobilizing force. So people feel still frightened that what if something happens and the same thing all over again. But good thing is in the South, people debate, and there is a plurality of opinions, which is what I think democracy is all about. And ordinary people debate.
Heonik Kwon, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much.